Well, good morning and welcome in. So good to see everyone. We have a nice crowd and great to see Mr. Brian back there. How you doing, man? Good to have you here. Is your bride with you? Samantha with you too? Okay, great. Hasn't come in yet? Good. So thankful to have you guys. Hope you're both doing well. All right, so we're in 1 Kings, the 11th chapter. 1 Kings chapter 11, chapter 10 we'll be finishing up. We're getting to 11, which is a little more of what you see on the screen. So if you're a sucker for love and for marriage, this is the study for you. We have so much love, maybe a little more marriage than love, but we have just lots of marriage and a little bit of love also mingled in. We're in 1 Kings, the 10th chapter. For our visitors, so glad to have each of you. We've been dealing with the divided, we're getting there. We just started the divided kings and kingdoms period, but we're not actually to the division of the kingdom just yet. So last week we spent talking about the glories of Solomon. You may remember that the Queen of Sheba comes to visit and she says, "Oh, I've heard all these stories, the legend, the man, the myth. It's unbelievable." And she comes and she says, "Wow," by the time her stay is concluded. And she remarks to Solomon, "Everything that I heard, the half of it wasn't told to me." The kingdom of God's people has reached its zenith. It's absolutely magnificent. The kingdom itself, and especially Solomon's reign, it seems has been built on three things. And the Queen of Sheba makes mention of these in chapter 10. She mentions the religion of the kingdom, and that's, of course, what's made it what it is. She speaks of the righteousness with which Solomon reigns. And then she also makes reference, of course, to his wisdom. And if you like alliteration, you might call that rationale. The kingdom has been built upon religion, righteousness, and rationale. It all makes sense. All right, so we're going to pick up in verse 14 of 1 Kings 10. But before I start reading that, I want you to mark that spot, or if you're not there yet, that works out also. Turn back to Deuteronomy chapter 17. Now, we've read from this a number of times in this entire Kings and Kingdom study, especially going back to the United period. But I feel like there is no class for which it will be more integral than this one. So I just want to refresh ourselves on this. Deuteronomy chapter 17, beginning in verse 14. Okay, so does anyone know where we are time-wise? It's been a while since we've mentioned this. Time-wise, where are we? World timeline. By the time of you're looking about the middle-ish of Solomon's reign, a good 20 years into his 40-year reign. Where are we? Okay, we've actually progressed a ways past that. Now, where we're going to go is about that spot, and that may be what you have in mind from Deuteronomy. That's good if so. So we're about 950. We're getting, we made a lot of progress. We're about 950 BC, where we are in Solomon's reign. So Deuteronomy 17, you're getting a little closer back to, you're almost at 1500 right there. A little more like 1450 BC. So this is right at 500 years prior to where we're studying. We're reading in Deuteronomy 17, verse 14. God says, "When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it." Now, that's going to fast forward about 50 years from where this is in Deuteronomy 17. A little more accurately, of course, 40, or you might even say 38. But wilderness wandering period. So this comes about 50 years after this, in 1450. "And then you say, 'I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me.'" Pause right here. We have to fast forward some more time frame to get to that spot. The first king, of course, is Saul, and we're about 20, maybe a little more years here into Solomon's 40-year reign. How long did the first two kings reign over Israel? 40. You have 40, 40, 40. And three of those. These are all significant biblical numbers. I don't think this is by accident, the chronology. It never is. So this is about 400 years after they get into and they possess the land. They say, and so this is just 100 years looking back from where we are in Solomon's reign. They decided, we want to have a king over us so that we can be like all the nations. God says, "You may indeed set a king over you, but it will be whom the Lord your God will choose." He's picked all three of these. "One from among your brothers shall set as a king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you. who is not your brother. Only, he has three very specific rules for Israel's kings. The first of these rules, 16, only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. And if you're wondering about the difference between the two, the one is you're just stockpiling them for yourself and for the kingdom. And the other one could be maybe getting involved in the horse trade, is what may be meant by this. Or even go to get them, even if they're not for yourself. Whatever you do, don't go back to Egypt to get horses, but don't multiply horses for yourself, period. That's rule number one. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way, the way of slavery, bondage, Egypt, a lot of symbolism there again. Rule number two for the king. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself. No polygamy for Israel's rulers. Lest, God warns, this is what will happen if he does, his heart turn away. That's rule number two. Rule number three, these are all prohibitive. Nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. So these are the three prohibitions. No horses. Don't get involved in the horse trade, and that's a part of rule number one, especially with Egypt. Rule number two, don't marry a bunch of women. Okay, no polygamy. And rule number three, no excessive multiplying of riches, silver and gold. And then here's a positive rule that's put into place, 18. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law. Now, you think it's a challenge to have to read all of the Bible and to study it. Raise your hand if you've ever written out your whole Bible from start to finish. All right, so if you do that, by the time you're done, you're going to be a student of the Word. And if you weren't then you have to constantly, verse 19, read it all the days of your life. The purpose of this, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them. Verse 20, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers. He's to be a person of humility, even though, humanly speaking, he's the number one person in the land. That he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. The implication of which is, if he doesn't follow these rules that I've given, then the kingdom will not be blessed and will not continue to succeed. He and his children. Keep that in mind as we do move forward. Okay, so we've read that. Now let's go back to our text as we start this morning in 1 Kings chapter 10 in the 14th verse. So we focused on the glories of Solomon. It gets a little ugly today. Now it turns into the shame of the ruler. Let's look at all of his failures. Verse 14. Now remember, the three R's. The Queen of Sheba is blown away and all of the majesty of Solomon, and she sees this tremendously successful, beautiful kingdom. The ruler's happy, his family's happy, but as well all the subjects, even his servants are happy. And that's not something you typically find in a dictatorship. But that's the case in Israel, because the kingdom is built upon what three R's? Religion, righteousness, and rationale, or wisdom. Notice how the focus begins to change in verse 14. We're going to start talking about money, lots of money. We get another R word, only this time it's riches. The weight of gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold. That's 25 tons of gold. You know, there are 2,000 pounds in every ton. So that means it's 50,000 pounds of gold that are coming in tribute, tax money, every year. So with these figures that were given today in gold and silver, I took a little time on Friday and I used just an online gold and silver calculator and calculated into what that would mean for us today if we had this much sitting on hand. Granted, in total fairness, we have no idea what the exact value of these things would have been back at this time. However, very similar today, gold is number one in value, and silver is valuable today, not as much and not as much back then either, but we can get an idea of what they would be worth. Yes, sir. Oh, wait, just 1 second. We have, hold on a second, Roy, we have our mic man back. Okay, yeah, thank you.
I was reading what Solomon would be worth in today's dollars from an author. He had tried to project what that kind of wealth would have amounted to. Solomon's total wealth would have been $2.1 trillion.
Wow.
And that's more than the value of than the gross national product of nearly every nation in the world.
Wow.
And he accumulated over a lifetime of 1,500 tons of gold. The wealthiest man, probably the wealthiest man maybe in the world, would be Elon Musk. He's only worth $263 billion.
Right.
That's an inconceivable figure in itself.
Yeah.
So, but he would be a pauper compared to Solomon.
Isn't that the truth? Wow. Yeah, thank you for that, for the perspective, Roy. Very good. Thanks for looking into that for us. So as far as just this annual cash flow that's coming in, if you had 50,000 pounds of gold today, you would easily be looking at greater than $1 billion and maybe a little closer to $1.5 billion. And this is just the tax money that's coming in. That's going to be from the subjects of Solomon's own kingdom, and then there are many vassal kingdoms by this point, kind of dependent on, have treaties with Israel. But keep in mind, this is the gold only that's coming in. This doesn't include the silver, the bronze, animals that are being paid, and all kinds of other sorts of help. So maybe as much as $1.5 billion annually coming in gold only. Now, we're told of an amount here, aren't we? 666 talents. That's not coincidental either. I think God makes sure that it's this exact number that comes in. There's only one other place in the Bible where this number is found. Turn to Revelation chapter 13. Now, do you recall from our Bible Numbers series, what does the number 6 represent in Scripture? Of course, you have 1, unity, 2, power, 3, the divine number, 7, perfection, 12, the religious number, 10, completeness, and so on. What does the number 6 represent in the Bible? Imperfection, it seems. Some look at it, and it's mentioned here in this passage, the number of man, which would make a lot of sense. What are we? Right? But made on the 6th day. But if 7 is perfection, 6 just doesn't quite make the cut. Not exactly there. And you can get as close to perfection as you want, but if you're not there, there's only one other option, and that is that you're imperfect. So let's read from Revelation 13. This is in the context of the beasts. There's one beast and there's another beast in this section of Revelation. And there's this worshiping of the beast that's going on, of course, who is not God. And we'll pick up in verse 16, Revelation 13. Also it, or this second beast, maybe in particular the image, causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both slave and free, to be marked on the right hand or on the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. If you don't mind, I recognize we could spend the rest of our class on the beast and the mark and all. If you don't care, just for today, let's not get into that, okay? That's not the purpose of our discussion. But this is verse 18. This calls for wisdom. Oh, like someone like Solomon. The application of the facts that you've learned from the Bible. Well, how do we need to use wisdom in understanding this? Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Imperfect, imperfect, imperfect. Anything or anyone other than God isn't going to make the cut, okay? And by the way, what's considered by the Hebrews to be the absolute number of complete perfection in every way is 777, because you have the number of perfection and it's 3 times. 3 is which number? The divine number. And so you have perfection to the degree of God, and you don't get any more perfect than that. But if you have 6, you have imperfection, yet you still have 3 of those 6s found, which is the divine number, and I think it makes a lot of sense in Revelation 13, where the context is, you go down to verse 8, those who are worshiping the beast, they're worshiping as three, or God, that which is imperfect or should not be worshiped, six. You take that concept in the New Testament and you go back to where we are in the Old, 1 Kings 16, the weight of gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold. I don't believe there's anything in the Bible that's a coincidence, and as we went through for an entire year, especially when it comes to numbers, I believe this is an insinuation that Solomon has taken that which is imperfect, and that's a passion for riches, and he has put that in a place where it does not belong, three of them in the divine spot. And if that's not what's intended by this number, we're certainly going to find that's what happens with Solomon and this object anyway. He chases after riches to the extent where they become his life's drive, his passion, the object of his worship. He has put those in the place of God. So this is all of the gold that's coming in tribute each year, and then you have the compiling of all of that, and then you end up with such silly riches, it's just beyond imagination. But verse 15, besides that, from the traveling merchants, doesn't even count that. Doesn't count the income of the traders. That was extremely lucrative for the Israelites, and I'll show you that here in just a little bit. Doesn't count all of that comes in from the kings of Arabia and from the governors of the country. You might recall there are 12 of them that are set up throughout Israel, and they have their specialized cities. I'd like to show you a map here that gives an idea of all that's coming into Israel and is a part of her economy. Down to the southeast, you have copper, and the southwest, we'll talk about some chariots coming from that vicinity. You have horses coming in, not only from the north, but also from the south and the west. And then there is tribute and corvée, which is simply forced labor. And it's people who would be put to work as part of their tribute and helping build the infrastructure and keeping it up in Israel, roads, bridges, and the like. So all of this is coming in. And by the way, we don't have it on the map, but you might see in that upper left box, I don't know if you can read that, the Tarshish fleet. That's always hard for me to say. Later, we'll read about Jonah and fleeing to Tarshish. That is all the way out on northwest on the Iberian Peninsula, which is modern-day Spain, Portugal. And so you have stuff coming in. The point of which is this, is coming in from all over. And just because we only read of 1.5 billion coming in from gold, don't think at all that's the extent of what's coming in. It's not even close. That's just your everyday average tribute on a yearly basis. Down in verse 16. And King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. I think these are going to be the head-to-toe shields. You'll see those of antiquity, and you can go behind it, and almost you end up becoming like an armadillo. You're just all around. You're in good shape. You're okay. Well, these are the big ones. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. From the weight of a gold shekel back then, that's believed to be about 7.5 pounds of gold that went into every shield that was constructed. And it appears this is probably for King Solomon, a lot of it, and his protection, again, from head to toe. And you translate that over into, if you had 7.5 pounds of gold today, that's $200,000 per shield that's being constructed. $200,000 per shield. Maybe a little bit excessive. Maybe not. Verse 17. By the way, he had 200 of those made. He also had 300 shields of hammered gold, and 3 minas of gold went into each shield. And that's exactly half as much. I'm going to guess that probably means that this shield was half the size of the other. That's likely going to be your average size shield that you're holding up, but you might have some exposure down below. And 300 of those were made, and if it's exactly half, it makes sense, 3.75 pounds of gold. $100,000 for us today was going into each one of these shields. verse 17 says, well, the king just put these in the house of the forest of Lebanon. We'll store those away for a rainy day, or if we don't have our big ones around, we're in that area, we'll just grab some of those. We may never use them, Excessive. Verse 18, moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory. Those poor elephants. PETA would have been all over these guys, I guarantee you. Ivory, a whole throne made of it. What do you think the value of that was? And then overlaid it with pure gold. You might not even be seeing the ivory, but if you ever dig down there, it's there. You'll find it. Maybe a little bit excessive and a little bit showy. The throne had 6 steps. That's interesting in Numbers. We know how wise Solomon is. I don't know that it intends to be 6 and stop there. I think it's probably there are 6 steps, and then you have the platform, which would probably be viewed as the 7th. This is perfection that's found up here. Hopefully it's just, looking at it in a divine way. Hopefully he's not looking at himself, but as we're going to see, I think he becomes a little bit self-absorbed. And he begins drinking the Kool-Aid that everyone's offering to him, telling him how awesome, how great, you are so smart. We've never met anyone like you. Everything I have is perfect, huh? All this elaborate showiness. The top of the throne was round at the back, and there were armrests, I'm sure they were big comfy ones, on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the armrests. 2. What's that number in the Bible tell us? Power. So this is, sitting atop here, this is a powerful, perfect 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ruler. Here's the smart guy up here. Verse 20, we find more lions. 12 lions, probably representative of the children of Israel, but the number 12 in the Bible represents what concept? Religion. Okay, so hopefully we're keeping this religion intertwined here. 12 lions stood there, one on each side of the 6 steps. Nothing like this had been made for any other kingdom. We're probably aware that lions have become significant in the kingdom of Israel, the symbolism. You recall the prophecy made through Judah back in Genesis 49 as Jacob's giving the blessing to all of his children, and it talks about the lion of Judah, of course, the prophecy of Christ. And so the lion's very significant in Hebrew culture. But nothing, did you hear that? Nothing like this had been made for any other kingdom. The expense of it, the silver and the gold. You recall what one of those rules, one of the 3 were of God? One day you'll get a king because you'll want to be like all the other nations, but I have these 3 rules. What's one of those rules? Okay, that's true. He can't be a foreigner. Has to be a native. No excessive gold and silver. You think maybe going a little past that boundary right now? Well, he didn't say how much. Verse 21, all King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold. Do you think that may be a little stringent of a requirement? Hey, listen, if that's not gold, you get it out of here. That's not fit for me, a king. Maybe thinking a little more of himself than he should. And all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon. This is Camp David, okay, for Solomon. This is his getaway. This is his retreat. In part, not exclusively, but kind of like Camp David, you have your, I'm sure, not that any of us has been there, but you have everything that you need to continue to run the country. And this is what this place is like. This is his Camp David, and in his getaway, all the vessels in that house, pure gold. So we're not talking like 16, 20. This is 24 karat, the purest of pure. Maybe a little bit excessive. Get that out of here. What is that, a silver mug? I don't drink out of that. You know who I am. Not one was silver, for this was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. Don't forget that silver is very likely still the 2nd most precious metal in existence at this time, and it was worthless. We have so much gold, we don't even want to talk about silver. For the king had merchant ships at sea, Roy, with the fleet of Hiram. And once every 3 years, the merchant ships came bringing loads of gold, silver, ivory, and then what do you want with apes and monkeys? You know, I mean, really? But anyway, probably I don't know if it's part of a trade. Anybody, Roy? Do you know anything on that? You're the history guy. Well, why the apes and monkeys? Yeah. Any guess? I'm the same way. But anyway, I guess it's extravagant. You know, it's different, and so they're bringing those in also. So King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. It's not just that he has a lot. He's way past, as Roy pointed out with some crazy figures to compare, beyond any and all kings of the earth. Wait a second here. What was God's rule again about gold and silver and the king whenever they assume the throne? Whenever he assumes the throne? Do not excessively multiply your silver and gold. Well, do you think going beyond any other king who's alive might be a little bit too far then? Verse 24, now all the earth sought the presence of Solomon. They're lifting him on a pedestal. And it seems that Solomon gets where he likes being lifted up on a pedestal, hearing how smart he is, how awesome he is, how great his kingdom is, which God had put in his heart. Let's not forget, this isn't how great Solomon is. The only reason he's anything is because God has made him this. Each man brought his present when he came. Roy? More articles of silver and gold. And so that's how you go from 1.5 annually to, what was it? How many trillion? I was thinking over 2. Yeah, 2.1 trillion. That's insane. Silver and gold, garments, armor, spices, horses, and mules at a set rate year by year. Verse 26, and Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. Why would you need horsemen? He had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. Why do you need horsemen? Horses? Oh, okay. Well, but God said don't have those. So we must be misreading this here. He's doing the second thing that God strictly forbade the king to do. Do not get horses for yourself. He had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen. Of course, we know what chariots are, and they're drawn by horses. They have these big wheels that turn on them. You know what the topography, what the landscape's like in Israel, right? I mean, I often use the comparison in northwestern Arkansas, beautiful. The Boston Mountains, the elevations are very similar, and the topography is about the same. Now, as you're winding through in northwestern Arkansas, I haven't been there very often. I've been in Arkansas a lot. I got to go to northwestern Arkansas like for the first time a few years ago. It's breathtaking. It's beauty. I don't know that I've ever seen anything just quite like what that is. And those monstrous hills and overlooks, there are a lot of those that do not have guardrails on those highways. And I could not help. Thankfully, I was going in like the middle of June. It was hot, okay? But I was thinking I would not want to live here in winter. No, wow, and icy, snowy roads, that would be pretty rough. How would you like to try to take a chariot, a horse-drawn chariot, through all of that and up and over those hills, and when you don't have good roads either? That's largely Israel. And yeah, there are some coastal flat areas, but not a lot. Have you ever thought about what is the purpose of having a chariot in Israel? I don't believe it was so much for the military prowess. And also, this is a time of basically total peace during the reign of Solomon. Why in the world do you need 1,400 chariots? I think this is what used to be called the Dixie. Now, we can't say that anymore. Now it's just the Stampede. I think this is nothing more than a show. It's pomp and circumstance. How great he is, and we do it because we can. What else are we going to do with all of our money? And so this looks amazing. Excessive riches. And then you have this pomp and circumstance, this great show of these riches, and the complete violation of God's command. Do not get a bunch of horses for yourself. And you remember, especially, he says, do not get any horses from where? From Egypt. You are never to go back that direction again. And I think there's a lot of symbolism that's involved. Once God helps us to escape from our bondage, what's his expectation of us? Move forward. Don't you ever go back that direction again. I saved you from your oppression. Well, he's violating the command. He's getting a bunch of horses. Verse 27, kind of a repetition here. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, the second most valuable substance in existence, and it was worthless. It was like a stone that was on the ground because of all the gold that they had. That was really the focus. Verse 28, also Solomon had horses imported. So these might not be necessarily to keep for themselves, but he brings in horses from guess where? Ha! The very place God said, even if they're not for yourself, don't send people down to Egypt and get involved with horses, probably talking about a horse trade. And they're going to get in the horse trade and they're going to make a killing off of it. He had horses imported from Egypt, that's to the southwest, as well as from Kivah, and that's basically due north as the bird flies. You can see that at the top of the screen, kind of leftish middle. The king's merchants bought them in Kivah at the current price. Now, a chariot that was imported from Egypt cost 600 shekels of silver. And you'll hear a little bit of difference in these numbers. And I think what it is, the shekel is a weight, but it will be set in at each metal. And it's kind of like a talent. All talents were not of equivocal weight at that time. You had a Babylonian talent and a Hebrew talent and a Syrian talent. And it's the same thing, I think, with these measurements of gold and silver, these shekels, that they could be set at a little bit of a different weight, and that's probably why the difference in the numbers. But 600 shekels of silver equates to 15 pounds of silver, and that would be $5,000 today if you had 15 pounds of silver, $5,000. That's going to be the cost of a chariot from Egypt. And again, I'm not saying that's exactly what it cost back then, but it gives us a little bit of perspective as to what it would be today. A horse, 150 shekels of silver, that would be 3.75 pounds and about $1,200 for every horse that would be purchased. And thus, through their agents, this is business, they exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria, which are going to be the kings of Aram, just right up here to the northeast of the Promised Land. And so they're getting all of these horses and these chariots from Egypt and Kivah. These ones, now the others I think are more theirs, but they're getting all of these constantly, not because they're going to keep them, but then they're going to turn around and ship these out. Essentially what Israel does is build a monopoly on the horse trade. They're buying up all the horses and all the chariots and all these people to their south and their north and their east. They want these. And then they're putting a big markup on them and they're selling them. And that's a big source of the wealth that Israel builds. Okay, let's cross over into chapter 11. But as we go into chapter 11, I just want to remind, God has 3 specific rules. Do not get a bunch of horses for yourself. Do not get involved in the horse trade. Getting horses from Egypt. Don't ever send anyone from Israel back that direction again. Do not excessively multiply your gold and your silver. What does Solomon do? But get a bunch of horses and chariots for himself. Chariots he doesn't even need. He's not even going to be using in the land. It's just for show. He sends agents down to Egypt and buys a bunch of horses and gets involved in the horse trade. His wealth becomes such so that it's mentioned he surpasses all the rulers of the earth. The third rule that God has for the king. What's that one? Okay, do not multiply your wives. By the way, he has another rule, and this is for all Israel. It's not just for the rulers, but whenever they do select a spouse, they're not to get what kind of a spouse? A foreigner. Yeah, and especially of the peoples of the land. Those were all supposed to be destroyed, the Canaanites. They haven't all been destroyed. Some of them are still around, but they're not to be marrying foreigners. They're to marry people of the nation of Israel, those who are focused on godliness Verse 1 of chapter 11. But, that's a word of contrast. King Solomon, here's the problem. I love them. Oh, okay, go ahead. I don't think that's the way God operates, do you? But King Solomon got his heart involved. He loved many foreign women. We've already learned about, as well as, the daughter of Pharaoh. That happened a long time ago, and that's where it all began, back in chapter 3. Women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. Well, if you're going to get one, you might as well get one from over. Well, you might as well just get one from all the places, shouldn't you? If you want to be fair, equal opportunity. So God had specifically forbade, not just of the king, but of all his people. Exodus 34. I'm not going to read all these. We won't have time. But if you're interested, Exodus 34, 11 through 16. Do not marry peoples of these nations. In the second giving of the law, Deuteronomy. No meal, law, doot, or duet, 2, second giving of the law. Deuteronomy 7, verses 1 through 5. He repeats, don't forget, you're not to marry any of these foreigners. I want you to only marry people who have a godly focus, okay, among his own people. Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 23 through 27. Nehemiah 13, 23 through 27. This is well on down the line, about 1,000 years later, and it's mentioned that Solomon sinned. This is not an oopsie. This is a complete violation of his ordinance. And Solomon sinned against the Lord his God by taking all of these foreign women to himself. He violated the Lord's teachings. All right, who would like to state verse 2? This is our memory work. 1 Kings 11:2. It's a little length, but I didn't feel like it was too bad. It kind of flows. 1 Kings 11:2. I see no hand. Oh, okay. Once that mic gets to Roy, he's going to go ahead and state it for us. 1 Kings 11:2. Go right ahead, sir.
From the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn your hearts away after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love.
Thank you, Roy. Well said. So the rule is, do not marry these. And you know how we work as kids with parents. Oh, you never want me to have fun. You hate me. Well, thankfully we have a father who is very explanatory for the rules that he has. It's not, I hate you, I don't want you to have any fun. He says, I have a reason for this. Because if you do this, what's going to happen? He says, if you intermingle yourself in the strongest relationships in this life with people who have no allegiance toward me, what's going to happen with you? They're going to pull you away. And in particular, they're going to pull your heart away. So this is why I'm making this rule as your dad. Whatever. So Solomon goes out and says, well, I'm going to have fun. I don't care what dad says. And he does it anyway. And then we're told that Solomon begins to cling to these in love. Why is that significant? That word can be translated, the Hebrew term, hold fast. He held fast or he clung to these in love. I'm going to read quickly just a couple of passages from the law. This is again rewinding about half a millennium. So the first one is in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 20, God's ordinance. You shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve him and hold fast or cling to him. I looked each one of these up. It's the same Hebrew word that's used in 1 Kings 11:2, our memory verse. Solomon clung to these in love. That's not what they were told to do. They were told to cling, same Hebrew word, or hold fast to God in love. The second one is Deuteronomy chapter 30, again, about half a millennium prior to this. Deuteronomy 30, verses 19 and 20. God speaking, bless you. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life that you and your offspring, keep that in mind for down the road, may live. Loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, and holding fast or clinging to him For he is your length of days and life, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them. The same Hebrew word that's used in 1 Kings 11:2. The teaching was you cling, you stick to, you hold fast to God. And Solomon did that in the early part of his reign. But, first word of chapter 11, things changed through the years. And now he's holding fast, or he's clinging to somebody completely different. And it's the wives to whom God specifically stated, do not cling or hold fast, do not join yourself at all to these. So back in our text, verse 3. If you're going to have one, you might as well have two. If you're going to have two, you might as well have 10. If you're going to have 10, you might as well have 100. And he had 700 wives. I don't think that he's this necessarily just this slave to intimacy, although that might have something to do with it as well. I think it's primarily something else, because it's mentioned they were what kind of wives? Princesses. Now, what would you see as the purpose of making sure, hey, if I'm going to have 700 wives, but they all had to be princesses? Power, alliance, treaty, political. Why be a billionaire when you can be a trillionaire? This is a chance for him to grow in fame and your legacy and all this. It's all about Solomon. And I think he has a purpose behind all of these marriages. And 300 concubines. Okay, these probably aren't all princesses, it sounds like. These are considered, and I hate this term, but secondary wives. This was never God's idea. You know, a lot of times you'll have people, oh, look at what these people in the Bible did. That's the God you serve. No, that's not the God I serve. These are the faulty people that are a part of the world that God created. And by the way, I'm one of those and you're one of those too, right? We've made a lot of mistakes. This is a mistake right here. This was never God's idea, never his plan for things. And guess what? The smartest guy who ever lived could not keep himself outside of the consequence of God's rule once he violated it. His wives turned away his heart. I don't think it was immediate. It probably took some years. But it wore on him through the years. And eventually he gave up, he surrendered. Okay, what is it that you want? Yes, sir. Right, yeah, very good. And that's what this wise guy would say. Hey, look, I used all this wisdom and all this knowledge for things that I shouldn't throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. And here's what I found out in the end. The only thing that really mattered is something that a dummy could understand. That God and his service is really all that matters in this life. Yeah, good point. Thank you for that. Yeah, very good, Roy. Verse 4. For it was, when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. His heart was not loyal, did not stick, did not cling to, as it once did, to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Wish we had more time. I know we don't. Sorry, I've cut us a little short on this. But I do want to state just in passing that Ashtoreth was a fertility goddess, and a part of her worship was the sexual acts in her temple. And Solomon facilitates all this, and he builds it for this. And then Milcom, that's another name for Molech, and that's the child sacrifice that went on. To Solomon's credit, I will say, we're not directly told that he encouraged this sexual immorality in the temples or that he condoned child sacrifice, but in the very least he set it up so that it could later occur, and maybe it even occurred during his reign. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord and did not fully follow the Lord as did his father David. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, widely thought to be the Mount of Olives, elsewhere stated to be the Mount of Corruption, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Now, as we close, I want to go back to 2 Chronicles chapter 8. This is a parallel of what we've been studying. Turn to 2 Chronicles. Let's read this together as we wrap things up. 2 Chronicles, 8th chapter, and the 11th verse. Notice how things have changed. Now, this is earlier in Solomon's reign. Verse 11, Solomon brought Pharaoh's daughter up from the city of David, his first foreign wife, of whom we have record, to the house that he had built for her, for he said, my wife shall not live in the house of David, king of Israel, for the places to which the ark of the Lord has come are holy. And when he marries his first foreign spouse, he says, but I'm not going to intermingle her into, I'm not going to get her too close to the worship of our God. That would be improper and unclean. And you fast forward a decade or so, and he's building all of these temples of pagan gods so that they can be worshipped. Why? Because he violated Dad's rule, thinking it didn't have a good purpose behind it. And then he found out what the purpose of God's rule was, which was exactly as advertised. I like how the scriptures really emphasize there was an issue with the heart. Do you notice that how many times we went through? The heart of Solomon clung to his wives. The heart of Solomon was not loyal to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father was. Why so much emphasis on the heart here? As always, what's Jesus say? For where your heart is, that's where you're going to find your treasure. Solomon's heart goes from religion, righteousness, and rationale to pomp and circumstance, to another R word, riches, and to women, and his life goes to pot. It's so imperative we keep our hearts in the right place. Okay, any final comments on what we've discussed? I know there's been quite a bit there, a little bit of rush through parts of it. Okay, appreciate the comments that have been brought out. For next week, let's do the very next verse as memory work, where we left off in verse 8. Let's do number 9 for our memory verse, 1 Kings 11:9. Please read all of the remainder of chapter 11. That's what we'll try to cover then next week. Thank you.